The rain was already hitting the porch light when I opened the door. Not gentle rain. The kind that makes the whole night smell metallic and cold, like the air itself is shaking. And there she was on my porch, holding my pizza, completely soaked, strands of dark hair stuck to her face, water dripping from the sleeve of a delivery jacket that was clearly too thin for Illinois weather. I remember the warmth of the pizza box in my hands, and the moment my eyes stopped on hers, that was the first mistake. Because she wasn't just the girl delivering my food. She was a girl. And I'd spent 25 years believing that girls weren't supposed to make my pulse do what it did in that exact moment. My name is Suzanne. I grew up in a church where everyone knew everyone. I had only dated men. My ex-boyfriend had left for Europe 3 months earlier, and I was still pretending that the hollow feeling in my chest was normal. So when I say that nothing about that night should have mattered, I mean it. She was just the daughter of the local pizza shop owner. A graduate student helping her parents on weekends. A girl on a bicycle who had only come because the address was close, and the rain had started too suddenly for anyone else to take the last delivery. None of this should have meant anything. But the moment she looked at me standing there in the doorway, barefoot, wearing shorts that were probably too short, and a loose shirt that wasn't meant for strangers to see me in, I felt something shift. Something small. Something dangerous. Because the rain was getting heavier, and she was starting to shiver, and the only thing standing between her and the storm was the open door behind me. So I said the one sentence that would quietly rearrange my entire life. Do you want to come inside and wait for the rain to pass? At the time, it felt like nothing. Just kindness. Just a soaked delivery girl in a storm that came too fast. But if you had told me then what that simple invitation would turn into, if you had told me that the girl holding my pizza would become the reason I would question everything I thought I knew about myself, I probably would have closed the door. Probably. But I didn't. And that's how the night it all began. I shouldn't still be thinking about her. About the rain. About the way the porch light caught in the water running down her sleeves. But I am. And the worst part is, it had been weeks since anyone had looked at me the way she did that night. Not really looked. Not the kind of looking that pauses somewhere between curiosity and recognition. I didn't know her name yet when that happened. All I knew was that the rain outside had suddenly started falling harder, the kind of sharp, relentless downpour that made the wooden railing on my porch shine under the yellow porch light. And the girl standing there, soaked, breathing a little harder than she probably wanted to show, was holding my pizza like it was the most normal thing in the world. It should have been normal. A delivery. A transaction. A quick thank you and a door closing. Instead I stood there a second too long. Barefoot on the cool wooden floor inside the doorway, holding the edge of the doorframe, while rain sprayed across the porch behind her. Something about the moment felt suspended. Not dramatic. Just slightly off rhythm. I remember thinking very clearly, this shouldn't feel like anything. But it did. And the thing about moments like that is you don't notice them when they start. You only recognize them later when you look back and realize something small had already shifted. Before that night, my life had become very quiet. Too quiet. 3 months earlier, Roger had stood in this exact doorway with a suitcase by his feet and told me Europe would be temporary. Temporary job. Temporary distance. Temporary everything. But people say temporary the same way they say maybe. It softens the truth. He lasted 6 weeks overseas before we both stopped pretending the relationship would survive. He called one night, voice echoing through a bad connection, and said something about how long distance was harder than he expected. I remember staring at the condensation sliding down my kitchen window while he talked. I remember saying, I understand. I remember the silence after. Then nothing. After that, the house felt larger. Not emptier, just larger. My grandparents had lived here for 40 years before leaving it to me. The place still smelled faintly like old wood and lavender cleaning spray. Some of their furniture remained, a small dining table with uneven legs, a couch that dipped slightly in the middle, a hallway clock that ticked loud enough to hear at night. Most evenings I didn't notice it, but on certain nights when the air outside was thick and cold, and the sky pressed low over Illinois, the silence felt heavier. That Saturday had been one of those nights. The cramps had started early in the afternoon. The dull, persistent kind that made your lower back ache and your patience evaporate. I had spent most of the evening half curled on the couch with a heating pad and a blanket wrapped around my waist, flipping through streaming menus without actually watching anything. Every show felt too loud. Every movie too long. Even music annoyed me. The phone buzzed once on the coffee table, my mother checking in, probably. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't love her. Just because conversations with my family always followed the same quiet rhythm. How are you holding up? Are you still going to church this Sunday? Have you heard from Roger? Questions layered with concern and expectation. And the truth was, I didn't want to talk about any of that. So around 10:30, I opened the delivery app and ordered the simplest thing possible. A medium pizza. Cheese. Nothing complicated. The neighborhood pizza place was only a few blocks away, a small family shop tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. I'd walked past it dozens of times but rarely went inside. The app estimated 25 minutes. I pulled the blanket tighter around my waist and went back to staring at the muted television. The clock in the hallway ticked. Rain began tapping against the windows. Soft at first, then steadier. By the time the doorbell rang, the rain had turned serious, a steady drumming against the porch roof that filled the house with a dull rushing sound. I remember sitting up slowly, letting the heating pad fall to the couch. For a second, I considered not answering. But the thought of cold pizza sitting outside in the rain felt worse than the effort of standing up. So I walked down the hallway, pushed my hair back with one hand, and opened the door. And that's when the moment happened. She stood there under the porch light, holding the pizza box against her chest. Water dripped from the edge of her dark hair. Her jacket, thin, black, clearly not meant for heavy rain, clung to her shoulders. And behind her, leaning against the porch railing, was a bicycle. Not a car. A bike. Which was the first thing that made me blink in surprise. The second thing was her eyes. Not their color, I didn't even notice that yet. Just the way they paused on me. Like she hadn't expected what she saw. Like she was recalculating something. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then she shifted the pizza box toward me slightly and said, a little breathless from the rain, "Delivery for Suzanne?" Her voice was warm. Low. You know how sometimes a voice lands somewhere just between casual and careful? Like the speaker is choosing words slightly slower than usual. That was how she sounded. I nodded, suddenly aware that I was wearing the soft gray shorts I slept in, and an oversized shirt that probably showed more of my bare legs than I would normally let a stranger see. It hadn't mattered an hour earlier. Now it did. Or at least, it felt like it did. I stepped forward onto the porch just enough to take the pizza. The cardboard box was warm against my hands. Steam escaped when I shifted the lid slightly to check it. Cheese. Perfectly melted. Normal. Everything normal. Except the rain had started blowing sideways now, misting the porch and dotting the front of her jacket with darker patches. She noticed me looking. Gave a small shrug. Storm came out of nowhere, she said. I nodded again. Still holding the pizza. Still standing there longer than necessary. This shouldn't be happening. That thought arrived quietly, almost like a reflex. Not because anything had happened. Just because the moment felt charged. And I couldn't explain why. I realized I hadn't paid yet. Sorry, I said quickly. Let me grab. But when I turned back toward the door, I heard something behind me. A sharp burst of rain hitting the porch roof harder than before. When I glanced back, the downpour had doubled. The kind of sudden Illinois rain that turns streets into mirrors within seconds. She looked over her shoulder at the bike, then at the rain, then back at me, and I saw it. The smallest hesitation. The kind you only notice when you're already paying too much attention. I held the pizza box tighter against my chest. Water splashed against the porch railing. And before I fully decided to say it, the words left my mouth. You'll get completely soaked riding in that. She laughed softly. A quick breath of sound. Too late for that. True. Her sleeves were already dripping. Still, the rain got heavier. And the thought came again. This shouldn't be happening. Except nothing had happened yet. Just a delivery. Just rain. Just a stranger standing on my porch under a yellow light. But for some reason I couldn't shake the feeling that if she left right then, if she grabbed the bike and rode away into the storm, something unfinished would follow her down the street. So I heard myself say something I hadn't planned. "You can come inside for a minute if you want." The words hovered between us. The rain roared against the porch roof. Her eyes met mine again. And the strange thing was, she didn't look surprised. Not exactly. More like she was considering something. Something small. Something that once decided couldn't really be taken back. The hallway clock ticked behind me. The pizza box warmed my hands. And for the first time that night, for the first time in weeks, really, the quiet inside the house didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something I didn't understand yet. Something that made my pulse move just a little faster. This shouldn't be happening. But the door was already open, and she hadn't said no. She stood there for one more second, with rain running off the edge of her jaw, and I became suddenly, painfully aware of everything at once. Torchlight buzzing above us. The cardboard warmth against my palms. The water dripping from the ends of her hair onto the wood. The fact that I had just invited a stranger into my house. A girl. A girl I had already noticed too much. "Are you sure?" she asked. Her voice came softer this time. Not casual. Not exactly polite either. Careful. Like she was giving me the chance to take it back. I should have taken it back. I should have smiled, said something practical, handed her the tip, and let the night close around both of us. Instead, I stepped aside from the doorway. "It's getting worse," I said. "Just until it slows down." That small pause in her expression shifted into something that looked almost like understanding. She nodded once, reached for the bicycle and rolled it just enough under the porch overhang to keep it out of the direct rain. Then she stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the cold. Not in the room. In her. She brought the weather in with her. Damp air. The smell of rain, pavement, and wet fabric. Tiny drops fell from her sleeves to the hardwood by the door, leaving a dark, scattered trail across the floor. "Sorry," she said immediately, glancing down. "I'm making a mess. It's fine." I closed the door behind her and the sound changed everything. Outside, the rain kept beating against the porch and windows, but inside the house the noise became distant, muffled, like we had stepped into a sealed pocket of warmth while the storm stayed on the other side of the glass. The hallway lamp was still on. So was the small light over the stove in the kitchen. The rest of the house stayed half-shadowed, soft around the edges. Not dark exactly. Just late. She stood near the door with her hands still slightly curled from gripping the pizza box earlier, shoulders drawn in a little from the cold. I put the pizza on the kitchen counter, then turned back toward her. Up close, the wet made everything more noticeable. The way her t-shirt clung beneath the jacket. The faint shiver in her arms. The thin silver chain at her throat, damp against her skin. She couldn't have been much younger than me, maybe a year or two. Her face had that unfair combination of intelligence and softness that makes someone impossible to place right away. Pretty, obviously. But not in the polished, obvious way men had always described women when they thought they were complimenting them. There was something quieter about her. Something that made me want to keep looking. I didn't. Or tried not to. "You look freezing," I said. She huffed a small laugh and rubbed her palms over her sleeves. "I'm okay." She wasn't. The lie was visible in the way she held herself. I crossed my arms without meaning to. A reflex. A barrier. Then uncrossed them just as quickly, because somehow that felt even more obvious. "You can take the jacket off," I said. "At least while you wait." "Thanks." She unzipped it slowly and peeled it off her shoulders. The fabric made that heavy, wet sound when it moved. Underneath, she wore a dark fitted top, soaked through enough that I looked away almost instantly, and then hated that I had noticed at all. This shouldn't be happening. Not because of anything she was doing. Because of what was happening in my own body. That quick pulse under my skin. That warm, disorienting rush low in my stomach. I moved toward the hallway closet and pulled out the stack of old towels I kept on the top shelf. Most of them had belonged to my grandmother, thick and a little rough from years of washing. "Here," I said, holding one out. She took it from me, brushing my fingers in the process. It was barely a touch. Just the back of her knuckles against mine. Still my breath caught. Not visibly, I hoped, but enough that I had to turn away under the excuse of reaching for another towel. "Thank you," she said. "No problem." I busied myself with useless things for a moment, straightening the napkin holder on the table, moving the pepper flakes slightly to the left, looking anywhere but directly at her. When I finally glanced back, she had tipped her head forward and was drying her hair with the towel, slow and absent-minded. Dark strands fell over her forehead and then disappeared again under the fabric. The movement lifted the hem of her damp shirt slightly at one side. I looked away so fast it almost hurt. This was ridiculous. She was in my house because of a storm. That was all. "Do you want some water?" I asked. "Sure." My own voice sounded strange to me. Too careful. Too even. I went to the kitchen and filled a glass from the sink, grateful for the few seconds with my back turned. The faucet ran. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the living room, the muted television shifted to some late-night commercial with bright artificial laughter. The outside world kept moving. Cars hissed through the wet street. Water ran from the gutters in steady sheets. When I turned around and handed her the glass, she had the towel draped around her shoulders, and one hand wrapped around her own elbow. "Thanks." She drank, then glanced toward the counter. "That smells really good." I smiled despite myself. "It's just pizza. Pizza can be life-changing under the right circumstances." The line landed lightly, but something in the way she said it made me laugh. A real laugh. The kind that escapes before you can measure it. And maybe that was the first real shift. Not the doorway. Not the rain. That. The simple shock of hearing myself laugh with someone I had known for less than 3 minutes. Her mouth curved at one corner when she saw it. "There," she said. "What? You look less miserable now." I stared at her. My first instinct was embarrassment, because it meant she had noticed the opposite. That when I opened the door, whatever was written on my face had been obvious enough for her to read. My second instinct was defensiveness. "I didn't realize I looked miserable." She winced, just slightly. "Sorry, I didn't mean." "No, it's okay." I exhaled and leaned one hip against the kitchen counter. "I probably did." Her eyes stayed on mine for a beat too long. Not intrusive. Just steady. Like she was deciding whether to ask the next question. "That night," she said. Something about the way she asked made it easy to answer. "Bad month." Her expression shifted again. Softer now. Not pity. Thank God, not that. Just attention. "Sorry." I gave a small shrug like it didn't matter even though it did. "I've had better." She looked down at the glass in her hand, then back up. "Breakup?" That surprised me enough that I laughed under my breath. "Is it that obvious? Not obvious." She tilted her head. "Just familiar." For a second the house went quiet in a new way. Not physically. The rain was still there. The fridge was still humming. Water still ticked down from her jacket where she'd hung it over the chair by the door. But inside the silence between us, something changed. Familiar. It made me wonder what, exactly, she was comparing. Her own breakup? Her own loneliness? Or just the general look of someone who had been left behind and was still trying to act normal in a house that no longer felt arranged the same way? "Yeah," I said finally. "He moved to Europe, or thought he wanted to, and then the relationship just sort of," I made a vague motion with one hand, "collapsed over the Atlantic, I guess." The corner of her mouth lifted. "That's one way to put it. It's the polite version." She smiled properly this time. I noticed two things at once: the small dimple that appeared near her left cheek, and the fact that I had no business noticing details like that. This shouldn't be happening. Thought returned, quieter now. Less alarmed. More unsettled. She glanced toward the rain-streaked window over the sink. "I think the universe has terrible timing." "Why?" "Because if I hadn't been the one to take this delivery, you'd be telling some guy from the shop all this instead." The line made me laugh again, and before I could stop myself I said, "I probably wouldn't." No. I don't usually tell strangers things." "Then I'm honored." There was something teasing in it now. Light, but definitely there. And I felt it. A subtle pressure under my ribs. Awareness. Not complete. Not named. But impossible to ignore. I looked toward the table just to break eye contact. "You're still freezing, I'll survive. You're shivering." As if to betray her, her body chose that exact second to do it again. A quick involuntary tremor in her shoulders. She laughed under her breath. Caught. Okay. Maybe a little. Without fully thinking through the intimacy of the offer, I said, "I can give you something dry to change into." The words changed the air. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough that I felt it in my own skin. Her fingers tightened very slightly around the glass. "Are you sure?" "Yes." I should have said it less quickly. I should have sounded more casual. Instead, it came out immediate, almost too warm. And I knew she heard it because her eyes lifted to mine again and stayed there. "For the record," she said, "this is definitely above average service for a pizza order." That made me smile, but my pulse had already started climbing. "I just don't want you getting sick, right?" she said softly. "Right." I turned away before I had to interpret that tone. My bedroom was at the back of the house. I walked there aware of every small domestic sound. The floorboard near the hall table that always creaked, the clock ticking, the rain pressing harder against the bedroom window. My room looked exactly like I'd left it. The bed half made, a cardigan over the chair, a book face down on the nightstand. I opened the dresser and hesitated. The obvious choice would have been an oversized sweatshirt and loose lounge pants. Neutral. Safe. Instead, my hand paused on one of my soft cotton sleep shirts. Pale blue, worn enough to be almost silky. Comfortable. Feminine without trying. I frowned at myself immediately and grabbed a pair of gray drawstring pants to go with it. Then I stood there holding them longer than necessary. Why did this feel loaded? Why did the idea of her in my clothes send that strange heat back through me? No. Not that. I exhaled, walked back down the hallway, and held the clothes out toward her. "These should fit." "Maybe." She took them carefully, the towel slipping a little off one shoulder as she did. Up close I could smell rain on her skin, and something faint underneath it. Soap, maybe. Clean. Simple. My chest tightened in a way I didn't like. "Thank you," she said again, quieter now. "The bathroom's right there." I pointed toward the hall. She nodded and moved past me. Close. Too close. Not touching. Just passing within that narrow hallway space, carrying my clothes in her arms. But the air changed as she went by, and I could feel the heat of her body despite the cold rain she'd brought in with her. Then the bathroom door closed, and I was alone with the sound of the storm and my own pulse. I stood in the kitchen for a full 3 seconds without moving. Then I turned too quickly, grabbed a plate, set it down, realized I wasn't even hungry yet, put it back, and pressed my palms against the edge of the counter. This was absurd. She was changing because she was soaked. That was all. But the image had already lodged itself somewhere I couldn't dislodge. Her fingers around the blue shirt, her damp hair against the towel, the faint crease between her brows when our eyes met. I reached for the pizza box just to give myself something to do and opened it. Steam rose into my face. The smell of melted cheese and garlic filled the kitchen. Familiar. Ordinary. A thing I could understand. In the bathroom, the faucet turned on briefly. Then off. A few seconds later, silence. Not real silence. The rain still drummed on the windows. A car splashed through standing water outside. The television in the other room switched to another commercial with overly cheerful music. But inside me, everything stilled. There are moments when your life hasn't changed yet, not officially, not visibly, but some private part of you has already stepped over a line and is waiting for the rest to catch up. I didn't have language for that then. Only sensation. Only the awareness that I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen at nearly 11 at night listening for the sound of a girl I didn't know stepping back into the hallway wearing my clothes. The bathroom door opened. I looked up and forgot for one suspended second to breathe. The blue shirt fit her differently than it fit me. Looser at the shoulders. Skimming rather than clinging. The gray drawstring pants sat low at her hips, slightly too short, showing a sliver of bare ankle above damp socks she'd apparently kept on because maybe they were less wet than the rest. Her hair was still damp, darker now, brushed back from her face with her fingers. Without the soaked delivery clothes, she looked younger and somehow more dangerous at the same time. Not because of anything overt. Because she no longer looked like a passing stranger. She looked like she belonged in the frame of the house. Like she had already been absorbed into it. My house. My shirt. My air. My breath caught hard enough that I had to turn it into motion, reaching for the stack of paper plates I didn't need. She saw it. I knew she saw it. Because when she stopped at the edge of the kitchen doorway, she didn't speak right away. Her gaze moved over my face slowly, as if she was taking in my reaction and choosing not to expose it. Then she smiled, small and crooked. I definitely owe you one now. The line should have broken the tension. Instead, it deepened it. Because her voice had changed too. Lower, maybe, from the warmth of being indoors. Or maybe I was imagining that. Maybe I was imagining everything. I swallowed and managed, "You don't owe me anything." Our eyes held. Only for a few seconds, but long enough for my body to understand before my mind did. Heat. Low and immediate. The kind that starts in the chest and moves outward. This shouldn't be happening. Not like this. Not to me. I picked up the pizza cutter just to give my hands a task. "Do you want a slice?" She leaned one shoulder lightly against the doorway. "Are you offering because you're hungry, or because now I'm trapped here and you feel guilty making me watch you eat?" The teasing was deliberate this time. Still gentle, but deliberate. I looked down at the pizza because suddenly meeting her eyes felt more dangerous than it should have. "Maybe both. I'll take a slice." I cut two and put them on plates. She came closer to the counter to take hers, and when our fingers brushed again, deliberately or not, I couldn't tell. Something in me tightened so fast it almost hurt. Neither of us commented on it. She folded one leg behind the other and leaned back against the counter opposite mine, holding the plate in one hand. For a minute we just ate. The normalcy of it should have helped. It almost did. The cheese stretched and snapped. The crust crackled. Rain tapped steadily at the kitchen window. Water still gathered under the chair where her jacket hung, and every few minutes a drop fell from one sleeve to the floor with a soft tick. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, I became more aware of her with every second. The way she cooled the slice before biting into it. The curve of her wrist when she brushed damp hair behind one ear. The fact that she wasn't rushing to fill the silence. That last part got to me more than it should have. Most people rush. They overshare or joke too much or ask useless questions just to cover the space. She didn't. She let the quiet sit there. And somehow that made me more aware of every tiny sound my body made. My breath, the shift of my shirt against my skin, the small swallow after each bite. Finally she looked over at me and said, "So, are you always this nice to delivery girls?" The question landed somewhere between flirtation and plausible deniability. My pulse gave a hard, traitorous beat. "No," I said. "No?" I looked down at my plate for a second, then up. "I don't usually invite them inside and hand over my clothes if that's what you mean." One side of her mouth lifted. "That's reassuring. For you or for me?" That made her laugh. A real one this time, warm and low. "For both of us," she said. The answer sat in my chest, like a held breath. And that was the shift. Not dramatic. Not a confession. Not some sudden impossible realization. Just this quiet, undeniable understanding that whatever I had thought this was when I opened the door, it wasn't that anymore. She wasn't just waiting out the rain. I wasn't just being kind. Something had entered the room with us, and neither of us was naming it. Yet. The rain didn't stop. Not really. It softened sometimes. A lighter tapping against the windows, a brief thinning of the sound. But every time it felt like it might fade, the storm gathered itself again and returned heavier. By the time we finished eating, the kitchen clock had crept past midnight. I noticed it when I reached for another napkin and saw the minute hand shift. Midnight? I should have felt awkward. A delivery girl in my house after midnight. a girl I had known for less than an hour. But the awkwardness never arrived the way it should have. Instead, there was something else. A strange calm that lived just under my skin, threaded with awareness. Too much awareness. Amy leaned her hip against the counter, finishing the last bite of her slice. She wiped her fingers on a napkin, then glanced toward the front window, where rain blurred the streetlights outside. "Still going," she said quietly. "Yeah." She tilted her head, listening to it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Water continued dripping from her jacket by the door. Somewhere down the street, tires hissed across wet pavement as a car passed through the intersection. The outside world moved. Inside the kitchen, everything felt slower. I rinsed the plates in the sink, mostly for something to do with my hands. The water ran warm across my fingers, and the ordinary domestic motion helped steady the strange tension sitting in my chest. "You didn't have to feed me too," she said from behind me. I smiled without turning around. "You already got caught in a storm for my dinner. It seemed fair." She didn't answer immediately. When I finally turned off the faucet and faced her again, she was watching me in a way that made my stomach tighten unexpectedly. Not invasive. Just focused. Like she was noticing things. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yeah." "For long. My grandparents left it to me," I said. "They lived here most of their lives." Her gaze moved slowly across the kitchen. The old cabinets, the worn wooden table, the crooked little calendar hanging near the refrigerator. "It feels like a place people stayed in for a long time," she said. That observation caught me off guard. "Is that good or bad?" "Neither," she said. "Just peaceful." I leaned back against the counter. "It's quieter than it used to be." She didn't ask what I meant, which made it easier to explain. "My ex lived here for a while," I said. The word ex still felt strange in my mouth, like a sentence I hadn't fully accepted yet. Amy nodded once, thoughtful. "The Europe guy." I laughed softly. "Yeah, the Europe guy. How long were you together?" 3 years. "That's a long time. It felt longer when he left." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for the glass of water she had been holding earlier and took a small sip. Her throat moved when she swallowed. My eyes followed the motion before I could stop them. My pulse shifted again. That same quiet warning surfaced in the back of my mind. This shouldn't be happening. Except now it sounded less like a rule and more like a question. Amy set the glass down. "Breakups like that are strange," she said. "How? You spend years learning how to exist with someone. Then suddenly you're supposed to remember how to exist without them." Her voice had changed again. Not sad exactly. Just honest. Something about that honesty made me ask, "You sound like you've done that before." A small breath left her. "Once, recently, last year." The answer hung between us for a moment. "What happened?" I asked. She shrugged lightly, though the movement carried weight. She realized she wasn't ready for the kind of life we were building. "She?" The word slipped out before I had time to stop it. Amy didn't react immediately. She just looked at me. A steady, quiet look. Then the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "Yeah," she said. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way awareness sometimes narrows a room. I realized something in that moment that I hadn't consciously considered before. Amy had said she. Not by accident. Not as a joke. Just naturally. And the strange heat that had been building inside me all night flared again, sharper now. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up. A subtle shift in my breathing. A tightness low in my stomach. I crossed my arms without meaning to. "So, you date women," I said. It came out less like a question and more like a realization. Amy tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes." That answer made my heart beat faster for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Sometimes. Not always. Just sometimes. "Does it surprise you?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it, because the honest answer was complicated. "Yes," I admitted finally. "Why?" I looked down at the countertop for a second before speaking. "I guess I just didn't expect it. Because I was delivering pizza? I smiled faintly. Because I didn't think about it. Amy studied me for a moment. Then she asked the question that shifted everything. And now? The two words were quiet, but they landed hard. My chest tightened. The rain outside thickened again, rattling softly against the kitchen window. And suddenly I became aware of something I had been avoiding all night. The way my attention kept returning to her. The way my body reacted every time she stepped closer. The way the room felt warmer when she spoke. I swallowed. I don't know, I said. That was the truth. Not the safe answer. The truth. Amy nodded slowly, as if she had expected something like that. There. Silence stretched again. Not uncomfortable. Just charged. The kitchen light hummed faintly overhead. Water dripped from her jacket again, another quiet tap on the floor near the door. Amy pushed herself away from the counter and walked toward the window. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the wood floor. She stopped beside the glass and looked out at the storm. From where I stood, the blue shirt I had given her hung loosely around her shoulders, brushing the tops of the gray pants. Seeing her in my clothes still felt strangely intimate, like a small boundary had already been crossed without either of us acknowledging it. Looks like I might be here a while, she said. Yeah. She turned slightly toward me. Is that okay? The question seemed simple, but something inside me reacted immediately. Heat. Awareness. The sudden realization that I didn't want her to leave yet. Yes, I said. Too quickly again. Amy noticed. Her eyes softened. And then she smiled in a way that made the room tilt slightly. You know, she said quietly, you've looked at me 3 times tonight like you wanted to ask something. My breath caught. I have not, you have. Her tone wasn't accusing. Just observant. What did you think I was going to ask? I said. She took a step closer. Not enough to invade my space. Just enough to narrow the distance between us. The air shifted again. You tell me, she said. My pulse jumped. I became suddenly aware of everything. Her height. The warmth of her presence. Faint scent of soap and rain still clinging to her skin. This shouldn't be happening. But the thought no longer carried certainty. Only tension. I wasn't going to ask anything, I said. Amy watched me carefully. Then she said something that made the ground shift beneath my feet. You keep looking at me like you're trying to figure out something about yourself. The words struck deeper than I expected. My chest tightened. Because the unsettling part was, she wasn't wrong. And realizing that made something fracture quietly inside me. A small internal line I had lived by for years. One I had never questioned before tonight. I forced a small laugh. You're very confident for someone who just met me. I read people, she said. And what do you think you're reading right now? She hesitated. For the first time since she arrived. Then she said softly, curiosity. The word settled heavily in the space between us. Curiosity. Not attraction. Not desire. Just curiosity. That should have relieved me. Instead it made my heart beat harder. Because curiosity was safer. Curiosity meant something could still happen. I looked up at her. Really looked this time. Her eyes held mine. Steady. Warm. Waiting. My body reacted before logic could intervene. Heat climbed slowly up my neck. My breath shortened. And somewhere inside me a question formed, quiet but impossible to ignore. What would happen if I stopped pretending this meant nothing? That startled me. Because even asking it felt dangerous. I had lived 25 years inside a very clear version of myself. Church on Sundays. Boyfriends. A life that followed recognizable lines. And now I was standing in my kitchen at midnight with a girl wearing my clothes, feeling something I didn't have language for. Amy stepped closer. Not touching. Just close enough that the space between us carried warmth. If I'm wrong, she said gently, you can tell me? Her voice was softer now. Careful again. Tell you what? That you're not curious. The room went very still. I could hear the rain. My heartbeat. Faint creak of the house settling around us. And suddenly the risk became visible. Not just the moment, everything behind it. My family, my church, the life I had always assumed I would live. All of it standing quietly on the other side of a line I hadn't crossed. Yet, I exhaled slowly. I didn't say you were wrong. Amy's eyes changed when I said that. Just slightly. Recognition. Something deeper than teasing. Something that made my stomach tighten again. The distance between us felt suddenly fragile. Like one small movement could change everything. Neither of us moved. Not yet. But the possibility hung there. Heavy. I had no idea what I was about to do. And that realization alone made me see myself differently than I had an hour earlier. Because the girl who opened the door tonight would have known exactly where the line was. The girl standing here now wasn't so sure. My lips were still warm when she stepped back. Not far. Just enough that I could breathe again. The kitchen light hummed softly above us, and for a moment I didn't move at all. My back was still resting against the counter, the cool edge of the wood pressing lightly into my palms. The rain outside had softened into a steady rhythm against the windows, and the entire house seemed to be holding its breath along with me. Amy was standing close. Closer than she had been before. Close enough that I could still feel the warmth of where her mouth had been a second earlier. My heart was beating harder than it should have. I hadn't expected that part. I thought the kiss would feel confusing. Instead it felt clarifying. Not safe, but clear. Amy studied my face carefully, like she was searching for the moment when regret might appear. "You okay?" she asked softly. The question made me laugh under my breath. "Give me a second." Her smile returned slowly. "Fair." I exhaled through my nose, trying to steady the sudden rush moving through my chest. My skin still felt warm. My lips felt different. My thoughts, which had been spinning all evening, had gone strangely quiet. That silence inside my head was new, and a little terrifying. Because it meant the part of me that normally explained things, categorized them, labeled them, kept everything organized, had stepped aside, leaving only the feeling. I looked up at her again. "You didn't answer my question earlier," I said. "Which one? What usually happens next?" Her expression shifted just slightly. "Depends on the person," she repeated. "And what do you think happens next with me?" Amy hesitated. Not awkwardly. Thoughtfully. Then she said something that made my pulse kick again. "I think you're deciding whether that kiss scared you, or made you curious about the next one." My stomach tightened immediately. The honesty in that sentence was disarming, because it landed directly on the truth. My body had reacted before my mind did. The warmth was still there. The awareness. And the unsettling realization that I wanted to feel it again. I pushed away from the counter slowly. Not toward her. Just enough that I was standing upright again. Amy watched the movement carefully. "Still curious?" she asked. The question was gentle. No pressure. No expectation. Just an opening. I became suddenly aware of everything again. The house around us. The rain outside. The quiet midnight hour. And the risk. If someone from my family walked in right now. If someone from church saw this. If the version of me that existed yesterday could see the version of me standing here tonight. Everything about this moment sat on the wrong side of the life I thought I had. And yet, my body leaned forward before I consciously decided to move. Amy noticed immediately. Her breathing changed. Just slightly. I stopped a few inches from her. Close enough now that I could see the faint flecks of gold in her eyes. Close enough that the warmth between us felt almost tangible. "I'm not scared," I said quietly. The words surprised even me. Amy searched my face. Then she asked almost in a whisper, "What are you then?" I swallowed. The truth formed slowly. "I think I'm trying to understand why that felt right." The sentence landed softly between us. For a moment neither of us spoke. Amy lifted her hand carefully, the motion slow enough that I could have stepped away if I wanted to. I didn't. Her fingers brushed the side of my wrist. Touch was light. Barely there. But my body reacted instantly. a rush of warmth spreading up my arm and settling somewhere deep in my chest. Amy watched my reaction. Not with amusement. With attention. "You feel that?" she asked. "Yes." My voice came out softer than expected. "Good." The word wasn't smug. It was reassuring. Like she was confirming something we were both discovering at the same time. Outside, the rain shifted again. The distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, low and slow. Amy stepped closer. This time the distance disappeared completely. Her hand slid gently from my wrist to my forearm, warm against my skin. Every nerve in my body seemed suddenly aware of that single point of contact. My breath shortened. "Tell me if you want me to stop," she said quietly. The sentence settled heavily in the air. Consent. Clear. Simple. I shook my head before she even finished speaking. "I won't," I said. The words felt irreversible the moment they left my mouth. Amy leaned in again. This time slower. More deliberate. Our lips met a second time, but the kiss was different now. Deeper. Not rushed. Just a gradual loss of the distance that had existed between us all evening. Her hand moved from my arm to the side of my waist, gentle but steady. My fingers found the front of her shirt without thinking. The blue cotton felt soft under my hands. My shirt, but somehow different on her body. The realization sent another quiet rush through me. This shouldn't be happening. Except the thought no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a memory of the person I had been before tonight. The kiss deepened slowly. Not overwhelming. Just inevitable. When we finally pulled apart again, the room felt warmer. Smaller. Amy's forehead rested briefly against mine. Neither of us spoke. I could hear both of our breathing. The quiet of the house. The rain. And underneath all of it, the unmistakable awareness that the night had already crossed a line. Amy brushed a strand of hair away from my face. "You okay?" she murmured again. I nodded. More certain this time. "Yes." A small smile formed at the corner of her mouth. "Good." Something shifted in the atmosphere then. Not urgency, but permission. The moment when hesitation dissolves and the rest of the night begins unfolding naturally. Amy's hand slid gently into mine. "Come here," she said softly. She led me toward the living room. The lamp near the couch cast a warm amber light across the old furniture my grandparents had owned for decades. Rain continued, tracing slow lines down the windows, blurring the streetlights outside into soft golden halos. The room felt quiet. Safe. Amy sat first, leaning back into the corner of the couch. I hesitated for half a second, then sat beside her. The space between us disappeared again almost immediately. Her arm wrapped lightly around my shoulders. My head rested against her without thinking. For a few seconds we simply sat there, breathing. Listened to the storm, feeling the quiet weight of what had just happened. Amy turned slightly toward me. Our eyes met again. The question that formed in my mind was private and sudden. Was I really about to cross the rest of this line with someone I met tonight? The thought should have stopped me. Instead, it made something inside me soften. Because the truth was simple. I didn't want the moment to end. Amy kissed me again. Slow. Warm. And somewhere between that kiss and the quiet laughter that followed, between the soft lamplight and the fading storm outside, the night stopped belonging to hesitation. Time slipped. The house grew quieter. The world outside faded into distant rain and dark streets. And when the hours finally passed, and the storm began to fade completely, Amy was lying beside me on the couch, her fingers tracing slow circles on my arm. Our breathing had settled. The room was peaceful again. Different. Irreversibly so. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, feeling the strange calm that had replaced the confusion I started the night with. Amy shifted slightly beside me. "You're thinking again," she said sleepily. "Yeah. Good thoughts or scary ones?" I turned my head toward her. "Both." She smiled faintly. "That's normal." Her hand squeezed mine once. Then she closed her eyes again, resting quietly against my shoulder. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. But something told me the real storm in my life had only just begun. Morning arrived slowly. Not with sunlight. With quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into a house after a storm has finally passed, when the air feels washed and heavy at the same time. For a while, I didn't even open my eyes. I stayed exactly where I was, half curled on the couch, listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of someone else breathing in the room with me. Amy's hand was still resting lightly over mine. At some point during the night we had shifted, the blankets sliding halfway onto the floor, our legs tangled together in the narrow space of the old couch. My cheek rested against the soft cotton of the blue shirt she was wearing. My shirt, and I could feel the faint warmth of her body through the fabric. For a few seconds I didn't move, because the moment I did, reality would begin reorganizing itself around what had happened. And something inside me wanted to stay here just a little longer, inside the quiet space before questions arrived. Amy stirred beside me. Not fully awake. Just enough that her fingers tightened slightly around mine. "You're awake," she murmured. Her voice was rough with sleep. "Yeah, what time is it?" I lifted my head enough to glance toward the clock on the wall. "Almost 8. She groaned softly. "8? Yeah. That means my dad opened the shop 30 minutes ago." The words pulled both of us fully back into the morning. Amy sat up slowly, running a hand through her hair. The damp curls from the night before had mostly dried now, falling loosely around her shoulders. She blinked once toward the kitchen like she was trying to remember exactly where she was. Then her eyes found me again, and something warm passed between us. Not awkwardness, not regret, just recognition. The memory of the night sat quietly in the room with us. Neither of us rushed to mention it. "You stayed," I said softly. The corner of her mouth lifted. "You didn't kick me out." I thought about it. She laughed quietly. "Sure you did." I pushed myself upright, pulling the blanket back over my shoulders. The house still smelled faintly like rain and warm pizza crust. Outside the windows the street looked washed clean, small pools of water reflecting the pale morning sky. Amy stretched slightly, her arms lifting over her head before she dropped them again. "I should probably get back," she said. The sentence landed somewhere inside my chest before I could stop it. Back. Back to the world that existed before last night. Back to the part of my life where she was just a girl who delivered food. Except she wasn't that anymore. Neither of us said it out loud, but the shift was there. Real. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Amy studied my face for a moment, like she was trying to read something that hadn't been spoken yet. "You okay?" "I think so. You look like someone who's processing." "That obvious?" She smiled softly. "A little." I rubbed a hand over my face, trying to gather the scattered pieces of the morning. "I just didn't expect my life to change direction over pizza." Amy laughed again. "That's fair." For a second neither of us spoke. Then she asked something that caught me off guard. "Are you regretting it?" The question was gentle, but direct. I looked at her. Really looked this time. At the girl sitting in my living room, wearing my clothes, hair still a little messy from sleep, eyes steady and open. And the strange thing was, the answer came easily. "No." The word settled between us. Clear. Amy's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good," she said quietly. She stood up from the couch and stretched again, walking slowly toward the chair by the door where her delivery clothes still hung drying. The morning light from the window fell across the room differently now. Brighter, cooler, revealing the details the night had hidden. The water spots on the floor. The empty pizza box on the counter. The 2 plates still sitting by the sink. Normal life returning piece by piece. Amy picked up her jacket and turned it over in her hands. "Still a little damp," she said. "You could leave it here." She looked back at me. "You sure?" "Yeah." Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment. "Then I'll have an excuse to come back." My pulse shifted. The words were casual, but they carried weight. "You could come back even without the jacket," I said before thinking too much about it. Amy smiled slowly. "I was hoping you'd say that." The moment stretched, and something about the way we were looking at each other now felt different from the night before. More certain. less cautious, but also more complicated. Because daylight has a way of bringing consequences into focus. Amy pulled her phone from the pocket of her jeans and glanced at the screen. 4 missed calls. From your dad? Yeah. She exhaled. I should really go. I nodded, even though the idea of her leaving felt heavier than it should have. Amy stepped closer to the couch, close enough that the space between us disappeared again. Her hand brushed lightly against my shoulder. Hey, she said. What? You're doing that thing again. Thinking too much. Exactly. I smiled faintly. Occupational hazard. She leaned down slightly and kissed me again. Not the tentative kiss from the night before. Not curious. Certain. Warm. Brief. But enough to send the same quiet rush through my chest. When she pulled back, she brushed her thumb once across my cheek. Don't disappear on me after this, she said. I won't. You promise? I hesitated for a fraction of a second, because promises suddenly carried more weight. But then I nodded. Promise. Amy studied my face like she was memorizing it. Then she stepped back toward the door. She pulled on her still damp jacket, grabbed her phone, and slipped her shoes on near the entryway. When she opened the door, the morning air rushed in, cool and clean after the storm. Her bicycle still leaned against the porch railing, drops of water clinging to the metal frame. She paused on the threshold, then looked back at me. You know, she said, this might be the best pizza delivery I've ever made. I laughed. I'll try not to expect this level of service every time. Amy grinned. Good. Then she stepped out onto the porch, wheeled the bike onto the wet pavement, and swung one leg over the seat. The street glistened in the early morning light. For a moment she just sat there, watching me from the driveway. Then she said something that stayed with me long after she rode away. Next time, she called softly, you're coming to my side of town. Before I could respond, she pushed off the ground and started pedaling down the quiet street. I stood in the doorway until she disappeared around the corner. Only when the sound of the bicycle tires faded completely did I close the door. The house was quiet again. The couch still held the warmth where she had been sitting. The blue shirt still hung loosely on her shoulders when she left. And suddenly I realized something that made my chest tighten. Last night had felt like an accident. A strange moment created by rain and coincidence. But standing there in the silent house that morning, it didn't feel accidental anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I had no idea how to explain. And that realization was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. A few weeks passed before life tested what had started that night. Not dramatically at first. Amy and I settled into something that felt surprisingly natural, almost like the rhythm of our lives had been quietly adjusting around each other for longer than either of us realized. Some evenings we met at the pizza shop after it closed, sharing a late slice while the ovens cooled and the lights dimmed one by one. Other nights she rode her bike over to my house, leaning it against the porch rail exactly the way she had the night the storm pushed her through my door. That porch had become our quiet landmark. Some nights we talked for hours, sitting on the steps with our knees almost touching while the air cooled around us. Other nights we stayed inside, stretched out on the couch under the same warm lamp that had watched our first uncertain kiss. The world outside kept moving. The church bells still rang on Sunday mornings. My mother still called to ask if I was eating well, if I had spoken to Roger again, if I was doing okay after everything. The neighborhood still looked exactly the same. Same trees, same sidewalks, same quiet houses with porch lights that flicked on at dusk. But my life no longer felt the same inside it. There were moments when I still caught myself pausing, wondering if the version of me from a few months earlier would recognize the person I had become. Amy noticed those pauses. You do that thing again sometimes, she said one night, watching me from the couch. What thing? You disappear into your head. I smiled faintly. Habit. You're allowed to just exist here, you know. I looked at her then, really looked. At the calm certainty in her expression, the quiet patience she carried in moments when I was still untangling my own thoughts. I know, I said, and I meant it. But acceptance doesn't erase the world around you. It only changes how you walk through it. The night Roger came back was warm and quiet. No rain, no storm warning. Just the soft hum of summer insects outside the windows and the glow of the living room lamp spilling across the rug. Amy was stretched across the couch beside me, her feet tucked under one of my legs while we half-watched some old movie neither of us was really paying attention to. At some point she had pulled on the same blue shirt I had given her that first night, the one she kept forgetting to return. She wore it like it belonged to her now. My arm rested behind her shoulders, her fingers lazily tracing circles along my wrist. Comfort. That was the word that described the moment best. Comfort. The doorbell rang. Not loud. Just a simple, ordinary sound. But something about the way it cut through the quiet made my chest tighten before I even stood up. Amy glanced toward the hallway. Expecting someone? No. I slipped my arm away and stood, walking down the hall toward the door while the bell echoed faintly in my head. When I opened it, the world shifted. Roger stood on the porch. For a second I didn't move. He looked almost the same as the last time I had seen him, maybe a little thinner, his hair slightly longer, the faint lines around his eyes deeper than before. But the familiarity of him hit me like a memory I hadn't prepared for. "Suzanne," he said. My name sounded strange in his voice. "Roger." He gave a small, uncertain smile. Surprise. My heart began beating harder, not with longing, not with excitement, but with the shock of something unfinished, stepping back into my life without warning. "When did you get back?" I asked. 2 days ago? 2 days? Yeah. He shifted slightly, glancing past me toward the hallway. I was hoping we could talk. Before I could answer, a soft voice came from behind me. "Everything okay?" "Amy." Roger's eyes flickered past my shoulder. I turned instinctively. She had stepped into the hallway without me noticing, one hand resting lightly on the wall as she looked toward the door. Roger saw her, and the air changed. Not dramatically, just enough that everyone in that small space felt it. "Roger," I said slowly, "this is Amy." The moment stretched. The word that came next felt heavier than it should have. "A friend." Amy didn't react immediately. Her expression remained calm, but I knew her well enough now to see the quiet shift in her eyes. Roger nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, you too," Amy said. Silence filled the hallway. Roger cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you had company." "It's okay," I said quickly. "What did you want to talk about?" He hesitated, then said something that made the room feel even smaller. "I made a mistake." Amy's gaze dropped to the floor for half a second. Roger continued. "Europe wasn't what I thought it would be. Everything felt wrong without you." My chest tightened. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said. And suddenly the weight of the past stood there with us. The years we had spent together, the plans we once made, the version of my life that had seemed so certain before he left. Maybe," he said quietly, "we could try again." The words settled into the space between us. Behind me, Amy didn't move, but I could feel her presence. Quiet, steady, and something inside me cracked open. Not with confusion, with clarity. Because the strange thing was, when Roger stood there offering the life I had once imagined, my mind didn't fill with memories of the past. It filled with the sound of rain on my porch, the warmth of Amy's hand in mine, the quiet certainty in her voice when she told me I didn't have to figure everything out at once. Roger watched my face carefully. "Suzanne?" I stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door behind me so my voice wouldn't carry into the house. The night air was warm. Still. "I'm really glad you came back safe," I said. Relief flickered across his face. "But I can't go back to what we had." His expression faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean things changed? Because of her." The question wasn't angry, just confused. I thought about that for a moment. "Not because of her," I said. "Because of me." Roger looked down at the porch railing. "You're serious, yes." He nodded slowly, the weight of the answer settling into him. I guess I didn't expect that. I didn't either. We stood there for another moment. Then he gave a quiet, tired smile. "Well," he said softly, I hope whoever she is, she knows how lucky she is." When he walked away, the street felt strangely quiet. I stayed on the porch until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside. Amy was standing in the living room exactly where I had left her. Waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She just looked at me. And for the first time since the doorbell rang, the tightness in my chest eased. "It's over," I said. Amy studied my face. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah." She stepped closer. Close enough that the warmth between us returned instantly. "You sure?" I smiled. For the first time in a long time, Amy brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. "You did that." "Did what?" "Chose." I looked around the room. The same couch, the same lamp, the same quiet house where a storm had once pushed two strangers into the same moment. But now it didn't feel like the beginning of something uncertain. It felt like the continuation of something real. And for the first time since that night on the porch, the thought that once haunted me returned in a different form. This shouldn't be happening. Except now I understood. The sentence had barely finished forming in my mind when the silence between us changed. Amy was still standing close enough that I could see the small crease between her brows, the one that appeared whenever she was trying not to push me toward an answer before I was ready. She had always done that. Given me space. Even when she probably didn't want to. And for the first time since Roger left my porch, I realized something clearly enough that it almost made me laugh. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the question. Not of what it meant. Amy searched my face quietly. "You're thinking again," she said. "Yeah, about him." I shook my head slowly. "No? Then about what?" The living room lamp cast the same soft amber light it had the night we met, stretching across the couch and the worn rug my grandparents had owned for decades. Outside, the street had grown quiet again, the kind of stillness that comes late at night when even the traffic lights seem to blink slower. For a moment I didn't answer, because what I was about to say wasn't just about Amy. It was about me. About the version of myself I had spent years trying to live up to. "I spent a long time thinking my life had already been decided," I said finally. Amy tilted her head slightly. "By who?" "My family. My church. The expectations I grew up with." "And now?" I looked down at our hands. Somewhere between the conversation with Roger and the moment we started talking again, Amy's fingers had found mine without either of us noticing. They were warm. Steady. Real. "Now I realize something," I said. "What?" "That I was never actually choosing anything." Amy didn't interrupt. She just listened. "I was following a version of myself that other people recognized," I continued quietly. "A version that made everyone comfortable. And the one standing here now?" I smiled faintly. "She's still figuring things out." Amy studied my face carefully. "You don't have to have everything figured out tonight. I know." The strange thing was, that no longer bothered me, because uncertainty didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like possibility. I looked up at her again. "But there is one thing I'm sure about." Her eyes softened. "What's that?" "That when Roger stood on my porch tonight, I didn't feel torn." Amy blinked once. No. What did you feel?" The answer came easily. "Certain." The word hung quietly between us. Amy exhaled slowly, like she had been holding her breath without realizing it. "You have no idea how good that is to hear," she said. "Why?" "Because I didn't want to be the reason you ran from something before you were ready." I laughed softly. "You weren't. What was it then?" I glanced around the room again. At the couch. At the lamp. At the quiet house that had witnessed everything changing in ways I never expected. "You were the reason I finally looked at my life honestly," I said. Amy didn't respond right away, but her fingers tightened around mine. The gesture was small. Still, it carried more meaning than most words ever could. "You know," she said after a moment, "that storm did terrible things to my delivery schedule." I smiled. "Oh, really? Yeah, how so?" "Well," she said, leaning slightly closer, "I was supposed to drop off one pizza and go home. And instead, I ended up accidentally rearranging someone's entire life. I laughed quietly. You say that like it was intentional. Her eyes sparkled in the lamplight. Maybe it was. Are you claiming responsibility for fate now? I'm just saying, some deliveries matter more than others. The warmth that spread through my chest this time felt different from the uncertainty that had followed me earlier in the week. Calmer, grounded, like something had finally settled into place. Amy's gaze softened again. So, she said gently, what happens now? The question wasn't heavy. Not like the one Roger had asked earlier. This one carried curiosity instead of expectation. I thought about it for a second. About the future I once imagined. About the version of myself who thought her story had already been written. Then I looked at the woman standing in my living room wearing the blue shirt she never returned. And I answered honestly. Now, I said, we see where this goes. Amy smiled slowly. That sounds like a good plan. She stepped closer. The distance between us disappeared again the same way it had the night the rain drove her through my door. Except this time there was no hesitation. No confusion. Just the quiet understanding that something real had begun. She kissed me gently. Warm. Certain. And when she pulled back, she rested her forehead lightly against mine. For a moment neither of us moved. The house was quiet. The night outside calm and clear. And for the first time since everything changed, the future didn't feel like something I needed to solve. It felt like something I could step into. Together. The storm that night was supposed to pass. But some things don't pass. Some things stay. And sometimes the life you thought you were supposed to live only changes when you finally open the door. And the only question that really matters is whether we're brave enough to follow where that truth leads. If this moment stayed with you, if you've ever discovered a new part of yourself when you least expected it, thank you for listening and sharing this story with us. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and tell us what part of Suzanne and Amy's journey resonated most with you.